The sudden thunder of horses' hooves broke the dawn stillness as Patience Calloway clutched her 3 children closer, her heart pounding in her chest. The auction block beneath her feet felt rough and unforgiving, much like the last 4 years of her life since her husband had been killed in a mining accident, leaving her with mounting debts and 3 young mouths to feed. Leavenworth, Kansas Territory, 1858, a place where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye, and where a widow with no means could find herself sold to the highest bidder to cover her late husband's debts. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty town square, drawing curious onlookers and potential buyers alike. Next up, we have Mrs. Calloway and her 3 young uns. Healthy woman, not yet 30, can cook, clean, and sew. Children are aged 7, 5, and 3, 2 boys and a girl. Starting bid is $50 for the woman, children to be sold separately. Patience felt sick. Her children Thomas, Emma, and little Samuel clung to her skirts, their small faces pinched with fear and confusion. She had promised them they would stay together, but now she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. "Please," she whispered to the auctioneer, "they're just children, don't separate us." The man barely spared her a glance. "That ain't up to me, madam, it's business." As the bidding began, Patience scanned the crowd desperately. Most avoided her gaze, but a few men eyed her with interest that made her skin crawl. The bids rose slowly, $55, $60, $65 for her alone. Then a separate bid started for Thomas, her eldest. $10 for the boy. "No," Patience couldn't help the cry that escaped her lips. Just as the horror of separation became imminent, a tall figure pushed through the crowd. Dust-covered and trail-worn, the man stood out among the townspeople in his practical cowboy attire, worn leather chaps over denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face until he tilted his head back. $100, the stranger called out, his voice clear and steady. The auctioneer paused. "For the woman, for all 4 of them," the cowboy replied, stepping closer. Now Patience could see him clearly, weathered but handsome features, piercing blue eyes, and a jaw set with determination. The auctioneer shook his head. "Can't do that, mister. They're being sold separate like." $200 then, the cowboy countered, "for all 4. That's my offer." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer looked to the sheriff, who gave a slight nod. No one else seemed interested in bidding that much. $200 going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the hat. Relief flooded through Patience, quickly followed by uncertainty. What did this stranger want with her and her children? Was this salvation or something worse? The cowboy approached the auction block and helped Patience down, his touch gentle but impersonal. "Name's Kieran O'Malley," he said quietly. "Got a ranch about 10 miles outside of town. Need help running it. You'll have your own cabin, food, fair wages." "Why?" Patience managed to ask, gathering Emma into her arms while keeping Thomas and Samuel close. Kieran O'Malley's gaze softened slightly. "Nobody should be selling children away from their mother. It ain't right." He paused. "My wagon's over yonder. Got supplies to finish loading, then we'll head out." As they walked away from the auction block, Patience felt the curious stares of the townspeople burning into her back. Thomas, always protective beyond his years, walked tall beside her, eyeing the cowboy warily. "Mama," he whispered, "can we trust him?" Patience squeezed her son's shoulder. "We don't have much choice right now, Thomas, but I'll keep you safe, all of you." Kieran's wagon was loaded with supplies: flour, coffee, tools, and other necessities from town. He helped Patience and the children onto the bench seat, then climbed up beside them and took the reins. "It's a fair piece to the ranch," he explained as they pulled away from Leavenworth. "We should make it by sundown." As the wagon rumbled along the rutted trail, Patience studied her benefactor or new owner. She wasn't quite sure which. Kieran O'Malley appeared to be in his early 30s. with strong hands and a lean, muscular build earned through hard work rather than leisure. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun, and a certain watchfulness in his manner that suggested he'd known his share of trouble. "Mr. O'Malley," she ventured after they'd traveled in silence for nearly an hour, "I need to understand what you expect from me and my children." Kieran kept his eyes on the trail ahead, cooking, cleaning, mending whatever needs doing around a house. "The children can help when they're able, but they ought to have time to be children too." He glanced at her briefly. "Nothing improper if that's what you're asking. You'll have your privacy." Patience felt a flush of embarrassment but also relief. "Thank you for that, and for keeping us together." Kieran nodded but said nothing more. As the day wore on, the children grew restless. Samuel fell asleep against his mother, but Thomas and Emma fidgeted and whispered to each other. "Mr. O'Malley," Thomas finally asked, his young voice serious, "do you have any horses at your ranch?" The cowboy's expression softened slightly. "More than a dozen. Raising and training horses is how I make my living." "I like horses," Thomas said cautiously. "My papa taught me to ride before he died." Something flickered in Kieran's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or memory. "Is that so? Well, maybe you can help me with them sometimes, if your ma approves." Thomas nodded solemnly, and Patience felt a small weight lift from her shoulders. Perhaps this arrangement wouldn't be entirely terrible. By late afternoon, the landscape had changed from the more populated areas near Leavenworth to rolling hills dotted with trees along creek beds. Finally, Kieran pointed ahead to where a small valley opened up before them. "That's O'Malley Ranch," he said, a note of pride evident in his voice. Patience saw a modest but well-maintained homestead, a main house built of sturdy logs with a covered porch, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. Off to one side stood a smaller cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Whitaker, comes in 3 days a week," Kieran explained. "She must have started dinner before heading home." As they approached the ranch, Patience noticed the small details that spoke of care and hard work: the neat fence lines, the well-swept yard, the garden plot behind the main house. Kieran pulled the wagon to a stop near the barn. "That'll be your cabin there," he said, pointing to the smaller structure. "It's basic but sound. 2 rooms, a fireplace for cooking and heating, got a pump for water nearby." He jumped down from the wagon and helped Patience and the children descend. Samuel woke during the transfer and began to whimper, clinging to his mother's neck. "It's all right, sweetheart," she soothed, though she wasn't entirely sure it was. Kieran led them to the cabin, opening the door to reveal a simple but clean interior: a main room with a fireplace, table, chairs, and a rocking chair, plus a smaller room visible through a doorway that contained 2 beds. "Mrs. Whitaker put fresh linens on the beds," Kieran said. "There's some food in the pantry to get you started. I'll bring your things from the wagon." Patience set Samuel down and walked slowly around the cabin, taking in what would be their new home. It was modest, but far better than she had expected, better certainly than the tiny room they'd occupied in town after being evicted from their previous home. "It's very nice, Mr. O'Malley. Thank you," he nodded. "Get settled in tonight. Tomorrow I'll show you around the place, explain how things work here." He paused awkwardly. "I'll leave you folks to get acquainted with your new home." After Kieran brought in their few belongings, Patience and the children were left alone in the cabin. Thomas immediately began exploring every corner, while Emma helped her mother unpack their meager possessions. "Are we staying here forever, Mama?" Emma asked, her small face serious. Patience smoothed her daughter's dark curls. "I don't know, sweetheart. For now, this is our home, and Mr. O'Malley seems to be a decent man who's given us shelter." That night, after a simple meal from the provisions Kieran had left, Patience sat in the rocking chair by the fireplace, watching her sleeping children. Thomas and Samuel shared one bed, while Emma slept in the other with room for Patience. She pondered their situation with mixed emotions. The relief of not being separated was overwhelming, yet the uncertainty of their future weighed heavily. Kieran O'Malley seemed honorable, but Patience had learned the hard way that men's intentions weren't always what they appeared. As she finally climbed into bed beside Emma, Patience made a silent promise to herself whatever happened. She would find a way to secure a future for her children, one where they would never again stand on an auction block. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the distant sounds of activity from the main house and barn. Patience rose early, dressed quickly, and set about preparing breakfast for her children. As they ate, a knock came at the door. Kieran stood outside, hat in hand. "Morning, Mrs. Calloway. Thought I'd show you and the young'uns around once you've had your breakfast." Patience nodded. "We're nearly ready, Mr. O'Malley. Thank you." The tour of the ranch revealed a well-run operation larger than Patience had initially thought. Besides the main house, barn, and their cabin, there was a bunkhouse for the occasional hired hands, a smithy, smokehouse, springhouse, and various corrals and paddocks for the horses. "Most days it's just me running things," Kieran explained as they walked. "Hire extra hands when needed roundup, breaking horses, that sort of thing. Mrs. Whitaker comes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to cook and clean at the main house." Thomas couldn't take his eyes off the horses in the nearest corral, beautiful animals that pricked their ears forward as the group approached. "These are my breeding stock," Kieran said, noticing the boy's interest. "Finest bloodlines I could find. Sell the foals to the army, to stage companies, to ranchers looking to improve their herds." "They're magnificent," Patience said honestly, impressed despite herself. Kieran's expression warmed slightly. "Horse flesh is something I understand." He glanced at Thomas. "You said you can ride." The boy nodded eagerly. "Well, I might have a gentle mare that would suit you for helping with chores." Kieran looked to Patience. "With your permission, madam." She hesitated but nodded. The joy in Thomas's eyes was worth the worry. After showing them around, Kieran explained what he expected from Patience: cooking an evening meal to be brought to the main house, washing laundry twice weekly, mending as needed, tending the kitchen garden, and general upkeep of both cabins. "The work's not too heavy," he assured her, "and you'll have time for your own affairs. I pay fair wages, $8 a month to start, plus your cabin and provisions." Patience was startled. "Wages?" But I thought Kieran's expression turned serious. "Mrs. Calloway, I may have purchased your debt contract, but I don't own you or your children. You work for me, not as a slave but as an employee. The debt will be considered paid within 6 months if all goes well." Relief and something like hope fluttered in Patience's chest. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley. That's more than fair." His gaze held hers for a moment before he looked away. "Just good business. Now I need to check on a mare that's about to foal. You folks get settled in and we'll start proper tomorrow." As Kieran walked toward the barn, Patience watched him go with newfound respect. Perhaps their luck had finally changed. The next few weeks established a routine. Patience rose early to prepare breakfast for her children, then set about her daily tasks: gathering eggs from the chicken coop, tending the garden, washing clothes, preparing the evening meal. Thomas eagerly helped with chores, especially anything involving the horses, while Emma proved herself useful with the chickens and garden. Even little Samuel did his part, carrying small items and helping his mother with simple tasks. Kieran was often busy with the horses or riding the boundaries of his property, but he made time each evening to check on Patience and the children, sometimes joining them for the meal she prepared. He was quiet by nature, not given to unnecessary conversation. But Patience began to notice the way his eyes softened when the children spoke to him, and how he always listened attentively when she talked. One evening, about a month after their arrival, Patience brought dinner to the main house as usual. The children accompanied her, as they often did, Thomas eager to report on his progress with the gentle mare Kieran had assigned him, Emma carrying a bunch of wildflowers she had gathered, and Samuel toddling along behind. Kieran met them on the porch, taking the covered dishes from Patience. "Smells good," he said, the closest he usually came to a compliment. "It's just stew and biscuits," she replied, "but I found some wild onions and herbs to add flavor." Inside, the main house was simple but comfortable, much like Kieran himself, Patience thought. Functional furniture, a few books on shelves, and surprisingly good quality dishware that Mrs. Whittaker kept polished. The one luxury was a piano against one wall, though Patience had never heard it played. As they ate, Thomas chatted enthusiastically about the mare, Dusty, and how Kieran had shown him to brush her properly. "Mr. O'Malley says I can start learning to muck out stalls next week," he announced proudly. Patience raised an eyebrow. "Does he now?" And did Mr. O'Malley consider that might be heavy work for a 7-year-old? Kieran cleared his throat. "Thought we'd start with the smaller stalls, madam. Build up his strength gradual-like. Boys got to learn sometime." There was something in his tone, not defensive, but almost seeking her approval, that softened Patience's concern. "Well, I suppose that's reasonable. But Thomas, you're to tell me if it's too much, understood?" Her son nodded solemnly, though his eyes shone with excitement. After dinner, as Patience was gathering the dishes, Emma approached Kieran shyly, holding out her wildflowers. "These are for you, Mr. O'Malley," she said softly, "for being nice to us." Kieran looked momentarily stunned, then carefully took the slightly wilted bouquet. "Thank you kindly, Miss Emma. Don't think I've ever gotten flowers before." The little girl beamed, then scampered back to her mother's side. Patience caught Kieran's eye over Emma's head and saw something there she hadn't noticed before, a vulnerability, quickly masked. "You play?" she asked, nodding toward the piano to change the subject. Kieran shook his head. "It was my mother's. She taught lessons to supplement the family income." A shadow crossed his face. "Haven't had the heart to get rid of it since she passed." "I'm sorry for your loss," Patience said quietly. He shrugged. "Been 5 years now. Do you play?" "A little. My father insisted on lessons when I was a girl." "You're welcome to use it," Kieran offered. "Shame for it to sit silent." Patience thanked him, though she wasn't sure when she'd find the time. Later that night, after putting the children to bed, Patience sat on the small porch of their cabin, enjoying the cool evening air. The sky was ablaze with stars, more than she'd ever been able to see in town. In the distance, a coyote called, answered by another farther away. The sound of footsteps made her turn. Kieran approached, carrying something in his hands. "Evening, Mrs. Calloway," he said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," she replied. "Just enjoying the quiet." He nodded toward the cabin. "Children asleep, finally." "Samuel had a hard time settling tonight. I think he's cutting another tooth." Kieran shifted awkwardly, then held out what he was carrying, a small wooden horse, intricately carved. "Made this. Thought the boy might like it." Touched, Patience took the toy, running her fingers over the smooth surfaces. "It's beautiful workmanship. He'll love it." She looked up at Kieran curiously. "You're full of surprises, Mr. O'Malley." A hint of color touched his cheeks, visible even in the dim light. "Winter evenings get long." Picked up whittling to pass the time. "Thank you. It's very thoughtful." He cleared his throat. "Well, just wanted to drop that by. Got an early start tomorrow, taking some horses to the fort for the cavalry to look at." "Will you be gone long?" Patience asked, surprised by her own concern. 3 days, maybe 4. Jackson from the next ranch over will check in on you folks. Anything needs doing, he'll handle it. Patience nodded, suddenly aware of how accustomed she'd grown to Kieran's quiet presence. Safe travels, then. He touched the brim of his hat. Good night, Mrs. Calloway. Patience, she said impulsively. My name is Patience. Kieran paused, his eyes meeting hers in the starlight. Good night, Patience. Good night, Kieran. After he walked away, Patience remained on the porch for a long time, the carved horse in her hands and an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. The days passed more slowly with Kieran away. Patience kept busy with her usual tasks, but she found herself watching the road for signs of his return. The children, especially Thomas, also missed him, though Jackson proved to be a kind, if somewhat gruff, temporary guardian. On the afternoon of the fourth day, Emma spotted the dust cloud first. Riders coming, Mama. Patience stepped out of the garden where she'd been weeding, shading her eyes against the sun. 3 horses approached Kieran on his big bay gelding, leading 2 others. Thomas ran toward them, only stopping when Patience called him back. Let Mr. O'Malley get settled first, Thomas. Kieran dismounted at the corral, speaking briefly with Jackson, who had emerged from the barn. After unsaddling his horse and seeing to the new animals, Kieran walked toward the cabin where Patience and the children waited. He looked tired, his normally clean-shaven face showing several days' growth of beard, but he smiled when Samuel toddled toward him, waving the wooden horse. Looks like someone's been taking good care of my gift, Kieran said, crouching down to the little boy's level. He hasn't put it down since I gave it to him, Patience said. How was your trip? Successful. Sold both horses to the fort at a good price. Kieran stood, wincing slightly. Patience noticed his stiffness. Are you hurt? Just saddle sore and tired. Nothing a hot meal won't fix. Dinner will be ready in an hour, she promised. There's hot water in the copper boiler if you'd like to clean up. Kieran nodded gratefully. Sounds like heaven right about now. That evening, after a hearty meal of rabbit stew and cornbread, Kieran sat on the porch of the main house with Patience while the children played in the yard. Jackson says everything went smoothly while I was gone, he commented. He was very helpful, Patience agreed. Though the children missed you, Kieran looked surprised. Did they now? Thomas especially. He was counting the days until you returned to continue his riding lessons. A small smile played at Kieran's lips. Boy's a natural with horses. Reminds me of myself at that age. And Emma wanted to know if you liked the drawing she left on your table. The one of the flower garden. It's mighty fine. Thought I'd frame it, actually. Patience studied him in the fading light. You're good with them. They trust you. Kieran seemed embarrassed by the praise. Children and horses, they know who means them harm and who doesn't. Simple as that. Not always so simple, Patience said softly, memories of her late husband's occasional harshness toward Thomas darkening her thoughts. Kieran must have sensed her change in mood. Their father, he began carefully, was he a good man? Patience considered the question. Robert had his virtues. He worked hard, provided for us, but he had a temper, especially when he drank, which was often toward the end. She twisted her hands in her lap. He never struck me or the children, but there were times I feared he might. Kieran's jaw tightened. No man worthy of the name raises his hand to a woman or child. I believe you mean that, Patience said, meeting his gaze. I've seen what damage an angry man can do, he replied. Something dark and old surfacing in his eyes before he blinked it away. Before Patience could respond, Emma called her to see a toad she'd found, ending the moment of confidence. As spring turned to summer, life on the ranch fell into a comfortable routine. Thomas thrived under Kieran's tutelage with the horses, learning to ride properly and helping with basic care of the animals. Emma, now 6, discovered a talent for gardening, working alongside Patience to grow vegetables and herbs. Samuel, at nearly 4, was everywhere at once, curious and energetic. Patience found herself enjoying the work more than she'd expected. The physical labor was tiring but satisfying, and watching her children flourish in the open spaces of the ranch brought her joy. More surprising was her growing fondness for Kieran. His gruff exterior had gradually given way to reveal a thoughtful, principled man with unexpected depth. One hot July afternoon, Patience was washing clothes at the pump behind her cabin when she heard the sound of piano music drifting from the main house. Curious, she hung the wet garment she'd been scrubbing and followed the melody. The front door stood open to catch any breeze, and through it, she could see Kieran seated at the piano, his back to her. His hands moved over the keys with surprising grace, drawing forth a bittersweet tune she didn't recognize. Not wanting to disturb him, Patience turned to leave, but a floorboard creaked beneath her foot. The music stopped. "I'm sorry," she said quickly as Kieran looked over his shoulder. "I didn't mean to interrupt." He shook his head. "It's all right, was just passing time." He started to rise. "Please, don't stop on my account. It was beautiful." Kieran hesitated, then settled back on the bench. "My mother's favorite. She played it on summer evenings. You play very well." A small smile touched his lips. Had no choice but to learn. Mother insisted all her children take lessons. "You have siblings?" Patience asked, realizing how little she knew of his past. Had 2 brothers and a sister. All gone now, brothers in the Mexican War, sister to fever. "I'm sorry," Patience said softly, understanding now his solitary existence. Kieran shrugged, but the set of his shoulders betrayed his feelings. "Life out here is hard, makes you appreciate what you have while you have it." Patience stepped further into the room. "Would you play something else?" He looked uncertain but nodded. "Any requests?" "Whatever you'd like." Kieran turned back to the piano, thought for a moment, then began playing again, this time a livelier tune that made Patience smile. "I know this one," she said, humming along. "Care to join me?" Kieran asked, indicating the space beside him on the bench. After a moment's hesitation, Patience crossed the room and sat beside him. The bench was narrow, their shoulders nearly touching. She placed her hands on the keys, found the right notes, and joined in, adding a higher countermelody to his playing. They played together for several minutes, the music filling the house. When the song ended, neither moved immediately, the shared moment hanging between them. "We make a good team," Kieran said finally, his voice low. Patience became acutely aware of his proximity, the clean scent of soap and leather that always accompanied him, the warmth of his arm against hers. "Yes," she agreed softly. "I believe we do." The sound of children's voices outside broke the spell. Patience rose quickly, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. "I should get back to the laundry," she said. Kieran nodded, but as she turned to go, he spoke again. "Patience," she looked back at him. "Perhaps we could play again sometime." The warmth in his blue eyes made her heart beat faster. "I'd like that." As Patience returned to her chores, she found herself humming the tune they'd played together, a new lightness in her step that had nothing to do with the summer sunshine. The following weeks brought subtle changes to the dynamics between Kieran and Patience. They began spending more time together outside of necessary work, playing piano in the evenings after the children were asleep, sharing stories of their childhoods, discussing books from Kieran's modest library. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Kansas sky in spectacular colors. Patience found herself looking forward to these quiet moments, even as she cautioned herself against reading too much into them. Kieran was her employer, after all, and her situation was still precarious, a widow with 3 children and few options. Yet she couldn't deny the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her, or how his occasional touch helping her down from the wagon, passing a book, their fingers brushing as they played piano, left a lingering warmth on her skin. The children, particularly Thomas and Emma, had clearly grown attached to Kieran. Samuel, too young to understand the complexities of their situation, simply accepted Kieran as a fixed part of their lives, running to him with skinned knees or treasures found in the yard with equal enthusiasm. One evening in early August, a thunderstorm rolled across the plains, bringing much-needed rain but also fierce lightning and window-rattling thunder. Patience had just gotten the children to bed when a particularly loud thunderclap shook the cabin, followed by frightened cries from the bedroom. She hurried in to find Emma and Samuel huddled together, wide-eyed with fear, while Thomas pretended brave indifference despite his pallor. "It's all right," Patience soothed, gathering her younger children close. "It's just a summer storm. We're safe in our cabin." Another lightning strike illuminated the room, followed immediately by a deafening boom that made even Thomas flinch. Samuel began to cry in earnest. A knock at the door startled them all. Patience went to answer it, finding Kieran on the porch, rain dripping from his hat brim. "Everything all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Saw the lamp still lit and thought I'd check." "The storm woke the children," Patience explained, raising her voice over Samuel's continued crying. "They're a bit frightened." Kieran stepped inside, removing his wet hat. "Mind if I try something?" Curious, Patience nodded. Kieran went to the bedroom doorway where 3 pairs of eyes turned to him. "When I was a boy," he said, his voice gentle, "my mother used to tell us that thunder was just the clouds playing ninepins in the sky. All that rumbling is just their bowling balls rolling across heaven's floor." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? That's what she said," Kieran replied solemnly. "And the lightning is just the angels lighting lanterns to see where their pins fell." Samuel's crying subsided to hiccups as he listened. "Angels? That's right, little man." Kieran moved further into the room, crouching down to the children's level. "Nothing to be scared of at all." Thomas looked skeptical. "That's just a story for babies." "Maybe so," Kieran agreed easily. "But I still think of it every time there's a storm, and somehow I'm never quite as bothered by the noise." Another thunderclap shook the cabin, but this time Emma giggled. "They must have knocked down a lot of pins that time." "A strike for sure," Kieran agreed with a smile. Patience watched from the doorway, her heart warming at the scene before her. This strong, solitary man, gently reassuring her children with childish fancies. He clearly didn't believe himself. The storm continued to rage, but with Kieran sitting on the edge of their bed telling stories about cloud people and their celestial bowling matches, the children gradually relaxed. Samuel drifted off first, followed by Emma. Thomas held out longer but eventually succumbed to sleep as well. Kieran rose carefully from the bed and joined Patience in the main room, his expression almost apologetic. "Hope you don't mind me interfering," he said quietly. "Mind? You're a miracle worker," she whispered back. "I've never seen them calm down so quickly during a storm." A flash of lightning illuminated his face, revealing a faint blush. "Just remembered what worked for me as a boy. Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful woman." "She was," Kieran agreed, a softness in his voice. "Would have liked you, I think. She always valued kindness and strength above all else. You have both in abundance." The compliment caught Patience off guard. "I'm not sure about that. There are days I feel neither kind nor strong." "Yet you are," Kieran insisted. "What you've endured, how you protect your children takes more strength than most men I know possess." The sincerity in his eyes made Patience's breath catch. They stood close in the small room, the storm forgotten as something equally powerful seemed to surge between them. Kieran stepped back first, breaking the moment. "Should get back to the house," he said, reaching for his hat. "Storm's easing up some." "Thank you," Patience said, "for everything." He paused at the door, looking back at her. "Good night, Patience." "Good night, Kieran." After he left, Patience stood for a long time listening to the diminishing thunder, her thoughts more tumultuous than the storm outside. The harvest season brought increased activity to the ranch. Kieran hired extra hands to help with the hay cutting and storage, preparing for winter. Patience's days grew longer as she cooked for the workers in addition to her regular duties, often with Emma's help while Thomas assisted with the horses and Samuel supervised from safe distances. Despite the exhausting work, Patience found herself happier than she'd been in years. Her children were thriving, her own health had improved with regular meals and purpose, and her growing feelings for Kieran, though she tried to keep them in check, added a sweet anticipation to each day. One crisp September morning, Kieran approached her as she was hanging laundry to dry. "Patience, I'd like to speak with you about something important," he said, his expression more serious than usual. Her heart skipped a beat, wondering what could prompt such formality. "Of course. Is something wrong?" "Not wrong, no." He glanced around. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" Concern mounting, Patience nodded toward the garden. "The children are with Mrs. Whitaker, learning to make apple butter. We could walk there." They strolled in silence to the kitchen garden, now yielding its final harvests before frost. When they reached the relative privacy of the tall cornstalks, Kieran stopped. "Your debt contract," he began, "is paid in full as of today. 6 months of work as agreed." Patience blinked in surprise. "Already? I hadn't realized." "You and your children are free to go if that's what you wish." Kieran's voice was carefully neutral, but Patience thought she detected tension in the set of his shoulders. "I see," she said slowly, trying to process this unexpected news. Freedom, the goal she'd hardly dared hope for, was suddenly hers. Yet the thought brought less joy than she'd anticipated. "Of course," Kieran continued, "winter's approaching and travel would be difficult. You're welcome to stay on same arrangement, paid wages, the cabin for as long as you like." Patience studied his face, looking for clues to his feelings. "And is that what you want? For us to stay?" Kieran met her gaze, something vulnerable surfacing in his eyes. "What I want." He paused, then seemed to make a decision. "What I want is for you and your children to be happy and secure." "If that means staying here, then yes, that's what I want." It wasn't quite the answer Patience hoped for, but she sensed there was more he wasn't saying. "The children are happy here," she said carefully. "They've grown fond of you and the ranch. And you?" Kieran asked quietly. "Are you happy here, Patience?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. Yes, happier than I've been in a very long time." Relief flickered across his features. "Then stay, at least through winter. Come spring, if you want to move on, I'll understand." Patience considered her options. She had some money saved from her wages, but not enough to establish a new life elsewhere with 3 children. More importantly, the thought of leaving the ranch, leaving Kieran, created an ache in her chest she couldn't ignore. "We'll stay," she decided. "Thank you for the opportunity." Kieran's smile was brief but genuine. "Good, that's good," he cleared his throat. "There's something else. Town's having a harvest dance Saturday next. Thought maybe you and the children might like to go. Mrs. Whitaker said she'd watch the young'uns if you wanted to attend the dancing portion." Patience was momentarily speechless. In all their months at the ranch, they'd rarely gone into Leavenworth except for supplies. "Are you asking me to accompany you to the dance?" she finally managed. A flush crept up Kieran's neck. "If you'd care to, no obligation, of course." The thought of an evening of music and dancing with Kieran sent a thrill through Patience. "I'd be honored," she said softly. His expression brightened. "Really, I'm glad." He gestured vaguely toward the barn. "Should get back to work. Got those new colts to train." As he walked away, Patience noticed a new lightness in his step that matched the buoyancy in her own heart. The days leading up to the harvest dance passed in a flurry of anticipation. Patience examined her limited wardrobe with dismay, finding nothing suitable for a social occasion. Her one good dress from before Robert's death was hopelessly outdated and worn. Mrs. Whittaker, observing her distress, offered a solution. "My daughter left some dresses when she married and moved to St. Louis," the older woman said. "About your size, I'd wager. You're welcome to see if any might suit." The dress patient selected was a deep green calico with a modest neckline and full skirt, simple, but far nicer than anything she'd worn in years. Mrs. Whittaker helped her take in the waist and adjust the length, chattering all the while about the upcoming dance. "Half the county attends," the housekeeper explained as she pinned the hem. "Music, food, dancing till midnight, first social event since summer's church picnic." "It sounds wonderful," Patience admitted, trying to stand still despite her excitement. Mrs. Whittaker gave her a knowing look. "Mr. O'Malley hasn't attended a social function in the 3 years. I've worked for him. Must be something special to change his mind." Patience felt her cheeks warm but said nothing. The day of the dance arrived, clear and cool, perfect autumn weather. Kieran took the wagon into town early for ranch business, promising to return by late afternoon. Patience spent the day in nervous preparation, bathing herself and the children in water heated on the stove, pressing the green dress, and attempting to style her hair in a more elegant fashion than her usual practical bun. Emma watched the proceedings with wide-eyed fascination. "You look like a princess, Mama," she declared when Patience finally donned the green dress. Thomas was less impressed, more excited about the promise of harvest games and treats at the afternoon portion of the celebration. Samuel, taking his cue from his brother, bounced around the cabin asking when they would leave. Kieran returned as promised, driving the freshly cleaned wagon with a team of matched bays instead of the usual workhorses. He'd clearly made his own preparations. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, his usual work clothes replaced by clean black pants, a white shirt, and a vest. He'd even polished his boots. When Patience emerged from the cabin with the children, Kieran's expression made her glad she'd taken extra care with her appearance. He stared for a moment before remembering his manners and removing his hat. "You look," he began, then seemed to search for an adequate word. "Beautiful," he finally said simply. "Thank you," Patience replied, feeling suddenly shy. "You look very handsome yourself." The children's excited chatter filled the brief, awkward silence that followed, and soon they were on their way to Leavenworth, the wagon rolling smoothly along the familiar road. The town was transformed for the harvest celebration. Main Street had been decorated with corn shocks, pumpkins, and colorful bunting. Tables laden with food lined one side of the town square, while games and contests occupied the other. A platform had been erected for the musicians who would play later. As they pulled up, several people turned to look, curious about Kieran's rare appearance at a social event, and even more interested in the woman and children accompanying him. Patience felt their stares, but held her head high as Kieran helped her down from the wagon. "Mrs. Calloway." "Mr. O'Malley." A familiar voice called out. It was the pastor's wife, Mrs. Anderson, approaching with a friendly smile. "How wonderful to see you at our celebration. And these must be your children, Mrs. Calloway. What handsome young ones." The greeting set the tone for their reception. Most townsfolk were welcoming, though Patience noticed a few disapproving glances from certain ladies who perhaps questioned the propriety of her living situation. Kieran seemed to notice as well, staying close to her side with a protective air that both touched and reassured her. The afternoon passed pleasantly as the children participated in games, Thomas winning a sack race, Emma proudly displaying the small rag doll she earned bobbing for apples. Samuel, tired but happy, fell asleep in Kieran's arms as the day wound down and the evening portion of the celebration began. Mrs. Whittaker, true to her word, arrived to take the children back to the ranch. You young folks enjoy yourselves, she said with a wink that made Patience blush. Don't hurry home on our account. As families with young children departed, lanterns were lit around the square and the musicians took their places. The fiddle player struck up a lively tune and couples began to form for the first dance. Kieran turned to Patience, a question in his eyes. Would you care to dance, Mrs. Calloway? The formality of his address, used for the benefit of those around them, couldn't mask the warmth in his voice. I'd be delighted, Mr. O'Malley, she replied, placing her hand in his outstretched one. Kieran led her to the dance area, his touch gentle but sure. As they took their positions for the reel, Patience felt a flutter of nerves. It had been years since she'd danced. It's been a while, she confessed quietly. I might be a bit rusty. Kieran's smile was reassuring. Just follow my lead. I promise not to step on your toes too often. The music began in earnest, and they joined the flow of dancers. Kieran proved to be a capable partner, guiding Patience through the steps with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his time on horseback. The initial awkwardness soon gave way to enjoyment as they moved together, sometimes separated by the pattern of the dance, but always finding each other again. During a promenade section where they walked side by side, hands joined, Kieran leaned closer. You're a fine dancer, he said near her ear, his breath warm against her skin. As are you, she replied, breathless more from his proximity than the exertion. Where did you learn, my mother again? He admitted with a small smile. Said no son of hers would grow up without knowing how to properly escort a lady at a dance. She taught you well. The dance ended, and another began. Patience and Kieran remained on the floor for 3 sets before finally stepping aside for refreshment. Kieran brought cups of punch, and they found a relatively quiet spot at the edge of the square to rest and observe. Are you enjoying yourself? Kieran asked, studying her face in the lantern light. Very much, Patience replied honestly. It's been so long since I've done anything like this. I'd almost forgotten what it feels like, to dance, to simply enjoy an evening, to not worry even for a few hours. She looked up at him. Thank you for bringing us. Kieran's expression softened. Seeing you happy is thanks enough. The simple sincerity of his words touched Patience deeply. In that moment, surrounded by the sounds of music and laughter, the glow of lanterns creating a magical atmosphere, she realized with perfect clarity that she was falling in love with Kieran O'Malley. The thought should have frightened her, a widow with 3 children, still rebuilding her life, but instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey. Kieran, she began, not sure what she intended to say, but feeling the need to speak some truth of her own. Before she could continue, they were interrupted by the mayor announcing the final dance of the evening, a waltz. Couples began moving back to the dance floor. Kieran set down his cup and offered his hand once more. One last dance, Patience nodded, placing her hand in his. He led her to the floor, and as the music began slower and more intimate than the previous tunes, he gently placed his hand at her waist, holding her closer than the earlier dances had permitted. They moved together in perfect harmony. Their steps matched as if they'd danced together for years rather than hours. Patience was acutely aware of Kieran's hand at her waist, the subtle scent of soap and leather that was uniquely his, the steady blue of his eyes as he gazed down at her. What were you going to say? He asked quietly as they turned. Before we were interrupted, Patience hesitated, courage failing her. Simply that this has been a wonderful evening. Kieran studied her face, seeming to sense there had been more to it, but he didn't press. For me as well, he said instead. Best I've had in longer than I can remember. As the music swelled toward its conclusion, their steps slowed. Around them, other couples continued to dance, but Patience felt as though they were alone, suspended in a moment outside of time. Patience, Kieran said, his voice low and intimate. I'm not a man given to flowery speech, but I need you to know. He paused, seeming to search for words. Yes, she encouraged gently. These past months, having you and the children at the ranch, it's changed everything. Changed me. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. I never thought to have a family of my own, but now I can't imagine the ranch without all of you there. Patience's heart quickened. We've grown fond of the ranch, she said carefully. Of you. The music ended, but neither moved to separate. Around them, couples began to disperse, the evening drawing to a close. It's late, Kieran finally said, reluctance evident in his tone. Should head back to check on the children. The practical reminder broke the spell of the moment. Patience nodded, allowing Kieran to lead her from the dance floor, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back as they made their way through the dispersing crowd. The drive back to the ranch was quiet, a companionable silence punctuated by occasional comments about the celebration. The moon was high and full, bathing the prairie in silver light that made the familiar landscape seem magical. When they arrived, Mrs. Whittaker reported that the children had gone to bed without fuss, tired from their exciting day. After the housekeeper left for her own home, Kieran walked Patience to her cabin. On the small porch, they paused. The night was still, the only sounds the distant call of a coyote and the soft nickering of horses in the barn. Thank you again for a wonderful evening, Patience said softly. Kieran nodded, his hat in his hands. Patience, what I was trying to say earlier. He took a deep breath. I care for you, more than I thought possible. You and the children, you've become everything to me. The simple declaration, spoken with such earnest emotion, moved Patience deeply. Kieran, the cabin door suddenly opened, revealing Thomas in his nightshirt, hair tousled from sleep. Mama, is that you? He asked, rubbing his eyes. The moment broken, Patience turned to her son. Yes, sweetheart, we just got back. You should be sleeping. Had a bad dream, Thomas mumbled. Emma's awake too. Kieran stepped back, replacing his hat. Should let you tend to them. Good night, Patience. Good night, she replied, unable to keep the disappointment from her voice. As Kieran walked toward the main house, Patience ushered Thomas back inside, promising to check on Emma and settling her children back to sleep. But later, alone in her bed, she replayed Kieran's words over and over, a warm hope blossoming in her heart. The days following the harvest dance brought a subtle but significant change in Kieran and Patience's relationship. Though neither spoke directly of the feelings acknowledged that night, there was a new ease between them, small touches exchanged more freely, glances that lingered longer. Kieran began joining the family for supper more regularly, sometimes staying afterward to read to the children or play checkers with Thomas. He taught Emma how to whistle through a blade of grass and showed Samuel how to make shadow puppets on the wall using the lamplight. Patience watched these interactions with growing certainty that what she felt for Kieran was not one-sided, that the family they were gradually forming might someday become official. October gave way to November, bringing colder weather and preparations for winter. The garden was put to bed, preserves stored, firewood stacked high beside both cabins. Kieran worked from dawn to dusk, ensuring the ranch was ready for the harsh Kansas winter ahead. One evening in late November, as the first snow of the season drifted down, Patience sat by the fireplace in her cabin mending one of Thomas's shirts. The children were already asleep, tired from a day spent helping Mrs. Whittaker prepare for Thanksgiving, which was just 2 days away. A knock at the door interrupted her work. She opened it to find Kieran, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. Evening, he said. Hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. Come in before you catch your death. Kieran stepped inside, removing his hat and coat. He seemed uncharacteristically nervous, running a hand through his hair and clearing his throat twice before speaking. I have something to ask you, he finally said. Been meaning to for a while now, just couldn't find the right moment. Patience set aside her sewing, her heart suddenly racing. "What is it?" Kieran took a deep breath. "I know this might seem sudden, though in truth I've been thinking about it since summer. The thing is, Patience, I've grown to care for you and your children more than I ever thought possible. Can't imagine the ranch my life without you all in it." He paused, seeming to gather courage, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "What I'm trying to say poorly, I'm afraid, is that I love you, Patience Calloway. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He opened his hand to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl set into it. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "She'd want you to have it." Patience stared at the ring, then at Kieran's face, earnest, hopeful, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. Tears welled in her eyes. "Kieran," she whispered, "are you certain? 3 children is a lot to take on." His expression grew more determined. "I love those children as if they were my own. Thomas's courage, Emma's kindness, Samuel's curiosity, they've brightened every day since you all arrived. I want to be a father to them if you'll let me." "And me?" Patience asked, her voice barely audible. Kieran stepped closer, taking her hand. "You, Patience, are the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. I've loved you since the moment you stood on that auction block, head held high despite everything. I just didn't recognize it then for what it was." A tear slipped down Patience's cheek. "I love you too, Kieran. Have for months now." Hope blazed in his eyes. "Then your answer." "Yes," Patience said, smiling through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." Joy transformed Kieran's features. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his embrace. Their first kiss was tender, reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "Should we tell the children in the morning?" Patience smiled, picturing their reactions: Thomas's solemn approval, Emma's delight, Samuel's innocent acceptance of this new development. "Yes, though I suspect they won't be particularly surprised. Thomas asked me last week if you were going to be his new father." Kieran laughed softly. "Smart boy. Observant. Like his future father," Patience replied, loving the way Kieran's eyes warmed at her words. They sat together by the fire, talking of plans: a Christmas wedding, perhaps, or waiting until spring. Practical matters of combining households, the legal adoption of the children, dreams for the future of the ranch. When Kieran finally left for the main house, promising to return for breakfast with the children, Patience stood on the porch watching his retreating figure through the gently falling snow, her heart fuller than she'd ever thought possible. The children's reaction to the news the next morning was everything Patience had anticipated. Emma squealed with delight, throwing her arms around Kieran's neck and declaring it better than Christmas. Thomas maintained a dignified composure that barely contained his obvious pleasure, solemnly shaking Kieran's hand before allowing himself to be pulled into an embrace. Samuel, not fully comprehending the significance, was nonetheless caught up in the excitement, bouncing around the kitchen asking if this meant Kieran would live with them now. "Actually," Kieran explained, crouching to the little boy's level, "it means you'll all come live in the big house with me." "Would you like that, Samuel?" Samuel considered this seriously, then nodded. "Can I bring my wooden horse?" Kieran laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. "All your horses, son, and anything else you want." The word "son" brought fresh tears to Patience's eyes. For so long, she had carried the burden of parenthood alone, trying to be both mother and father to her children. Now, watching Kieran with them, his patience, his genuine affection, his respect for their individual personalities, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Her children would have a father again, a better one than they'd had before. Preparations for the wedding began immediately. They decided on a Christmas Eve ceremony, intimate and meaningful, with just a few friends from town and neighboring ranches in attendance. Mrs. Whitaker took charge of the arrangements with grandmotherly enthusiasm, declaring that after 3 years of working for a bachelor, she was more than ready to help prepare for a proper family home. The week of Thanksgiving brought unexpected news: a letter from the bank in Leavenworth informing Kieran that a parcel of land adjoining his property was available for purchase. He rode into town immediately to investigate, returning with excitement evident in his usually calm demeanor. "It's prime grazing land with a good water source," he explained to Patience as they sat on the porch of the main house after the children were in bed. "Would increase our herd capacity by nearly half. Been hoping it might come available for years." "You should buy it," Patience encouraged, loving the way he spoke of "our herd," already thinking of the ranch as their shared enterprise. Kieran hesitated. "It's a significant investment. Would mean postponing some of the improvements to the house I'd planned as a wedding present." Patience squeezed his hand. "The house is lovely as it is. This is an opportunity for our future, the children's future. You should take it." The gratitude in Kieran's eyes warmed her. "I'll ride back to town tomorrow then, make the arrangements." The following day, Patience was up early, helping the children with their chores before Kieran departed for Leavenworth. As he saddled his horse, Thomas approached, asking if he could accompany him to town. "Could use a man's opinion on some things," Kieran told him with a wink. "If your mother approves." Patience nodded, touched by the way Kieran included her son in important matters. Thomas beamed with pride as Kieran helped him mount one of the gentler horses. "Be careful," Patience called as they rode off. "Back before dark." "Yes, madam," Kieran replied with a smile that still made her heart skip. With the men gone, Patience and Emma turned their attention to the main house, taking measurements for curtains and discussing how to rearrange furniture to accommodate a family of 5. Samuel helped by testing the bounce of every chair and sofa, declaring Kieran's favorite armchair the best for jumping a discovery Patience quickly discouraged. Late afternoon brought the sound of horses approaching earlier than expected. Patience went to the door, surprised to see not only Kieran and Thomas returning but also a wagon driven by Jackson from the neighboring ranch. As they drew closer, Patience realized something was wrong. Thomas rode double with Kieran and the wagon. The wagon carried something large covered with a tarp. Her heart stuttered. "Emma, take Samuel inside," she said sharply, hurrying down the porch steps. Kieran dismounted quickly, lifting Thomas down before approaching Patience with a grave expression. "There's been an accident," he said quietly. "Stampede in town. A bull broke loose from a cattle drive, spooked half the horses on Main Street." "Thomas," Patience reached for her son, checking him for injuries. "I'm fine, Mama," Thomas assured her, though his face was pale. "Kieran protected me." "Who?" Patience began, then looked toward the wagon, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. "Oh no, who is it, Kieran?" His expression confirmed her fears. "Mrs. Whitaker was crossing the street when it happened. She didn't have a chance to get clear." Grief stabbed through Patience. "Mrs. Whitaker, kind, motherly, full of life and plans for their wedding. Is she?" Kieran nodded solemnly. "Doctor did what he could, but her injuries were too severe." He glanced at Thomas, then added in a lower voice, "She didn't suffer long." Tears filled Patience's eyes. "The poor woman." "Her daughter in St. Louis." "Sheriff's sending word," Kieran said. "Brought her home because—" He hesitated, glancing at Thomas again, "because she considered this place home too. Thought it right she should rest here until arrangements can be made." Patience wiped her eyes, straightening her shoulders. "Of course. We'll prepare a room." She turned to Thomas. "Are you truly unharmed?" Her son nodded. "Kieran pulled me out of the way when the horses started running. He got knocked down protecting me." Patience noticed for the first time the tear in Kieran's sleeve and the scrape on his forearm. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he assured her. "Just a scratch. Thomas is what matters." The love and gratitude Patience felt nearly overwhelmed her grief. "Thank you," she whispered, touching his face gently. Together, they prepared the guest room in the main house for Mrs. Whittaker's body, making it as peaceful and dignified as possible. Jackson helped bring her inside, then departed with promises to return the next day to help with whatever was needed. That evening, after the children were finally asleep, all three in Patience's bed for comfort, Kieran and Patience sat by the fire in the main house, the weight of the day heavy between them. She was so looking forward to the wedding, Patience said softly, staring into the flames. Had all these plans for decorating the house, making it festive. Kieran nodded, his own grief evident in the tightness around his eyes. "Known her since I bought this place. Reliable as sunrise, warm as summer. Ranch won't be the same without her. Should we postpone the wedding?" Patience asked hesitantly. "It doesn't seem right to celebrate so soon after." Kieran reached for her hand. "Asked myself the same question, but then I thought about what Mrs. Whittaker would say if she heard us talking like this." Despite her sadness, Patience smiled slightly. "She'd scold us thoroughly and tell us life is for the living." "Exactly." Kieran squeezed her fingers. "We'll honor her properly, help her daughter with arrangements, but I don't think she'd want us to delay our happiness, not when she worked so hard to help make it possible." Patience leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "You're right. We'll have the wedding as planned, for her as much as for ourselves." The days that followed brought Mrs. Whittaker's daughter from St. Louis, a kind woman in her 30s who expressed gratitude for the care they'd shown her mother. The funeral was held in Leavenworth, attended by nearly the entire town, a testament to how beloved Mrs. Whittaker had been in the community. Life gradually resumed its rhythm at the O'Malley Ranch. Patience took over the duties Mrs. Whittaker had performed, with Emma eagerly helping. They began moving their belongings to the main house, transforming it room by room into a family home. Thomas spent increasing time with Kieran, learning the business of horse breeding and training, while Samuel explored his expanded territory with boundless energy. As Christmas approached, wedding preparations intensified. Patience finished sewing her dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes with Emma's inexpert but enthusiastic assistance. Kieran and Thomas built an arch for the ceremony, which would take place in the main house living room before a small gathering of friends. On Christmas Eve morning, Patience woke to the sound of excited whispers outside her door. The children had spent their last night in the cabin, while she slept in what would soon be her married bedroom in the main house. "Come in," she called, smiling as the door burst open to reveal all three children, Thomas carrying a tray with coffee and toast. "We made you breakfast, Mama," Emma announced proudly. "Kieran helped a little, but we did most of it. It's your wedding day." Samuel added unnecessarily, bouncing onto the bed beside her. Patience laughed, gathering her youngest into a hug. "So it is. And where is my husband to be this morning?" "He said it's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," Thomas reported solemnly, setting down the tray. "He's gone to the barn to finish a surprise." "A surprise?" Patience raised an eyebrow. "What kind of surprise?" Thomas shook his head. "Can't tell, promised." The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Friends began arriving by early afternoon, the pastor and his wife, neighbors from surrounding ranches, a few trusted friends from Leavenworth. The house was decorated with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles, filling the air with a festive scent. As twilight approached, Patience stood in her bedroom, Emma helping her with the final touches of her attire. The blue dress fit perfectly, complemented by a simple pendant necklace that had belonged to Patience's mother, her only family heirloom. "You look beautiful, Mama," Emma said, eyes wide with admiration. A knock at the door revealed the pastor's wife, come to announce that everyone was assembled and ready to begin. Taking a deep breath, Patience gave Emma a quick hug, then followed Mrs. Anderson to the top of the stairs. The scene below took her breath away. The living room had been transformed furniture rearranged to create a central aisle, the wooden arch positioned before the fireplace, every surface adorned with greenery and candles that cast a warm, golden glow over the assembled guests. And there, waiting beneath the arch, stood Kieran handsome in a new black suit, his face solemn until he looked up and saw her. The smile that spread across his features then was like sunrise after the longest night. Thomas and Samuel, dressed in their Sunday best, stood proudly at Kieran's side. Emma, appointed flower girl, preceded Patience down the stairs, scattering dried rose petals from last summer's garden. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. The pastor spoke of new beginnings, of families formed not just by blood but by choice and love. Kieran and Patience exchanged vows. They had written themselves promises to love, respect, and cherish each other, and the children they would raise together. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran kissed Patience with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The children crowded around them immediately, and Kieran knelt to embrace all three, officially welcoming them as his own. The celebration that followed was joyous, a Christmas Eve feast, music from a neighbor who played fiddle, gifts exchanged among family and friends. As the evening wore on, Patience found a moment of quiet with her new husband, watching the children play with their presents by the fire. "Happy, Mrs. O'Malley?" Kieran asked softly, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning against him. "Though I believe you mentioned something about a surprise," Kieran grinned. "Almost forgot in all the excitement. It's outside if you're willing to brave the cold for a moment." Curious, Patience allowed him to help her with her shawl, then followed him to the front porch. There, beneath the starlit sky, stood a beautiful sleigh, polished to a high shine, with comfortable seats lined with fur robes. "Kieran," she breathed, "it's wonderful. Made it for you, for all of us," he explained, pride evident in his voice. "Thought the children might enjoy rides in the snow. And perhaps," he pulled her closer, "perhaps you and I might slip away sometimes for a ride under the stars." Patience turned in his arms, lifting her face to his. "I think that sounds perfect." As they sealed the promise with a kiss, snow began to fall softly around them, gentle flakes catching in Kieran's dark hair and on Patience's eyelashes, christening their new beginning with a blanket of pure white. From inside came the sound of children's laughter and the warm glow of candlelight, their family, their home, their future together. For Patience, who had once stood on an auction block with 3 frightened children, it was more than a happy ending. It was a new beginning full of promise, security, and love. And in the days and years that followed, as the O'Malley ranch prospered and grew, as the children flourished under Kieran's guidance, as their family expanded with the arrival of twin boys 2 years later, Patience never forgot that moment of decision when a lone cowboy stepped forward and said, "I'll take all 4 of you." It had been their salvation, the first step on a journey that had led to this, a life filled with love, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful together. A true family, bonded not by circumstances but by choice, and all the stronger for it.